Good morning, good evening, and good afternoon, whatever part of the world you are tuned in from. This is Funny Like a Clown podcast. I'm your host, Dennis Wirth, episode 119, July 27th, 2021. Today we're going to be discussing old-time legendary comedian Mr. David Brenner. As always, today's episode is brought to you by G Vegas Buffalo Sauce. For the spicy, sweet, savory taste of game time, there's only one G Vegas available at www.gvegas.webs.com. I don't know if David Brenner liked buffalo sauce or not, but I know a guy who was a fan of his work, and I have on as a guest to discuss them, radio personality Michael Buster McMahon. Welcome to the show.
Dennis, thank you very much for having me back. I had so much fun when we did the Abbott and Costello one, and when I heard you wanted to do David Brenner was a influence on me, as I'm sure a lot of comedians.
Well, oh yeah, many comedians, yeah. But I mean, guys like us, we appreciate the old time comedy where a lot of the younger folks, they don't even, they may not even know who David Brenner is. But that's why we got Funny Like a Clown podcast. We're exploring the history of comedy, so hopefully the young comics can appreciate the past. But what made you choose David Brenner when I asked you who you wanted to discuss?
Well, when when I was younger, I used to do a lot of Abbott Costello skits and stuff, and then talent shows sometimes. I didn't always have a partner, and I said, you know what, maybe I should get into stand-up comedy. And the very first time I did comedy, I didn't try to say the material was mine. I said, this is Michael McMahon. I wasn't Buster then. Michael McMahon doing David Brenner's routine, the difference between mothers and fathers. And I did it at a talent show at a college where all these incoming freshmen and their parents were there. And this material absolutely killed. And I said, yes, I want to get into stand-up comedy because, of course, they could relate to it because it was an audience full of mothers and fathers and kids who definitely saw the influence.
So would you say David Brenner, he was one of your influences to want to be a comedian, yeah?
Absolutely. And let's face it, if there was no David Brenner, I don't think it's that stretch of imagination to say there might not be like a Jerry Seinfeld.
Yeah, I mean, they say he was the pioneer of observational comedy, which I mean, for our day, I guess Robin Williams, he was probably but that's a style of comedy where, you see things and you make comments on it, where another style of comedy be if you're a storyteller or if you're a current event teller. But he was known as like the very first observational humorist where, he could take a jar like the buffalo sauce and just make a comedy routine out of it off the top of his head. But,
well, it's common knowledge now. Like, we don't laugh at it now when people say, well, why do, hot dogs come in packages of 10 and rolls come in 8? But he was one of the first people, I think, to really, make that observation.
Right.
And
of course, it's an old joke now, but when he did it was new.
Public, the people went nuts. They were laughing like heck, and it's just something we take for granted now.
Yeah, well, I saw an interview with Steve Martin, and he was saying, a lot of the stuff you thought he did was new, but he said he was just passing on what he had learned from like Laurel and Hardy from years ago. So, each generation thinks it's new stuff, but it's been going on forever. Let's see, he was the most frequent guest on the Tonight Show during the Carson era, which if you're going to be on the Tonight Show, the Carson area is the time that's the time you want to be on.
Yeah, but there was only, people don't realize now, but there were 3 networks back then. And if you were on Johnny Carson, half the nation was seeing you.
You were a made man in comedy. It's not like today. If you get on today, it's a cool thing. Don't get me wrong. But you're not a made comic. You're not automatically working in comedy. Where back then, if you got seen on Tonight Show, that was it. You were working clubs throughout the United States of working comic. It was a whole different era for comedy.
And Johnny and him got along so well. He guest hosted like 70 times. And
he was ranked in 5th on most guest host appearances for Johnny Carson. Yeah.
Yep. And it's funny because one show went so well, the ratings went through the roof, and David Brenner was worried. He's like, "Oh my," because you don't want to upstage the king. And
yeah, Joan Rivers made that mistake, and he never talked to her again.
Yep. And so he got along very well with Johnny. And when he got his own show later on, he wanted to make sure it was okay. And one time, so he was guest hosting, and he got a phone call from Johnny. And he was like, oh, gosh, I'm fired because we did so well. Yeah. And Johnny called him to thank him, saying, thank you for bringing new people to my show.
So, yeah, so it was all how the king wanted to look at it. Because Carson, he was the king, if you wanted to get on back then. But Richard Lewis actually called David Brenner the king of hip, which I guess they were really close friends back then. So you think the king of hip was appropriate for that time? Or?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, David Brenner, he would come out. It wasn't like he was doing a material. He was like like just having a conversation. In fact, he was sort of like half chuckle through some of the stuff himself because he was so good at improvisation. He probably just came up with that joke on the fly anyway, and he thought
it wasn't staged; it was natural.
Yeah.
I know what you're saying, right? Have you ever had that problem? I mean, whether it was in life or work or comedy, where like you started to surpass your teacher and the teacher held it against you?
Boy, oh boy, I really would like to say that I did, but I can't think of a.
Well, that's how I got started in comedy. I took a class in comedy, and the teacher of the class, he used to book me a lot. Then I got to the point where I was starting to do more things than him, and he resented it. I could tell, like, it's like they want to see you do good, but not better than them. But I guess if you're a teacher, you don't want
I had a film professor in college who asked my opinion on certain directors. He's like, listen, I want to have, a thing about this director and that one. Which one would you recommend? And he's like, I don't know if I'm going to take your recommendation, but I respect your opinion. So that was kind of cool.
Yeah. So he talking to you as an equal, not so much a student there, right?
Yeah,
so that's a good
I think recognize I'm an old soul, and I like the old. I can name like a million movies I've seen from the 30s.
Yeah, I mean, you're a history buff of it like me, right? Yeah, you go way back. You appreciate the history of comedy, where the young comics now, they think they know the next thing. They don't care about. They think they've done everything. I made a joke, I took the microphone stand off the stand. I invented that. It's like, no, you didn't invent that. You didn't invent nothing, kid. All right, but no, I don't know. Your opinion that comedy runs in the blood or like in your genes or anything? Because I guess David Brenner's father was actually a vaudeville comedian.
Yep.
And I guess he did it for a while till his grandfather got mad at him that he did on the Sabbath day of Sunday, because if you worked on a Sunday back then, it was a big no-no. But
yep, he gave it up. But he was always David Brenner always said he was one of the funniest people he ever knew, and he always taught him, always leave him laughing. In fact, on his deathbed, his father, it was kind of a nice story. Once David Brenner made it, he bought his parents' cruises, and his mother actually died on a cruise. And the following year, he asked his father if he wanted to go because he was going to be performing. He goes, I understand if you don't want to go because it'll bring back memories. He's like, no, it'd be good. It'll bring back memories of her. I would like that. And he died on the ship too because he was like 92.
So like 2 years apart, they died on the same. Cruise. The same cruise line.
And he was cracking jokes as he passed. And David Brenner was like, you know what? What a great way to go.
Yeah, I mean, if you're gonna remember your wife, why not go in the same place? It's something. But I mean, during vaudeville, they were there to see the girls. They weren't there for the comedy, so you really had to win the crowd over if you were doing that. That was a whole different level of a tough crowd right there.
Especially vaudeville's sexier cousin, burlesque.
Yeah, I mean that's an era in comedy where they're not there for comedy. It's a whole different. That's why I remember you throwing the tomatoes at the stage on the old cartoons. That's where it came from, was vaudeville. So let's see, after high school.
How do you think we would have, Dennis? How do you think we would have done in that era?
You might have got a tomato upside the head. I don't know. You like to think you would have done good, but every crowd's different. I mean, I've had a bad night. I'm sure you have too. So it happens. I don't know.
I think you've seen some of my bad nights, so I think we're good.
All right. Well, you never know. We've all had them. Anybody who haven't is a liar. Okay. But that's the fun. If every crowd was the same, then it wouldn't even be interesting anymore. It's like, can I win this crowd over tonight? Can I do it tonight? That's the fun. After high school, he served in the U.S. Army 101st Airborne Division, then went to Temple University. Now, here's one I didn't know about him. He was a writer, director, and producer of over 115 television documentaries. Did you know that about him?
Yeah, absolutely. He won an Emmy. He won like about 30 awards. And he realized that he's like, you know what? No matter how good you are at documentary, you're not going to change the world. And he thought that he could actually make a bigger impact because he said he always was funny. He always got in trouble in school for being a jokester. And of course he had, his father to, he learned from his father. Right. And he said, I can make a bigger impact in the world, maybe as a comedian.
Yeah, I mean, a good documentary there. I mean, if you want to get educated on any subject, the documentary is the way to go. Because, I mean, start to finish, that's the way it's going to do it. But 115, I mean, if you were allowed to do one, you'd be lucky. But, I mean, he must have been a master of that art to be able to 115. It was Westinghouse and Metro Media hired him to do those. And as you said, he won over 30 awards and an Emmy. So, I mean, that's the top of the game in the documentary scene, I guess. Let's see, he decided to move on to comedy. His first paid gig was 1969 at the Improv. Do you remember your first paid gig?
Yes, the Pekin Garden in Hadley, Massachusetts.
Pekin Garden. Okay, that must have been a Chinese restaurant, right?
Yeah, it was. I think I got I was the middle guy. I think I got $20, and I was thrilled.
There you go. I think my first paid gig, I was the feature act at the Red Onion in Baldwinville, Mass, a big dive bar.
Yep, I've been there.
You did your set, and at the end of the set, they actually took a pitcher, a beer pitcher, an empty one, and they pass it around. And if they liked you, they'd throw a few bucks in it. If they didn't like you, they wouldn't throw nothing. And I think I made maybe 40, 50 bucks. I mean, which, because though I'd thrown a couple bucks at a time, I guess that wasn't bad. I get up to that much, but that was my first paid gig. Then.
That's the place they had that hook on the wall, right? Where that hook, you had to swing the hook to latch on the thing. It was like they had this bar game or something there.
Was it? I don't recall. Yeah, they had a lot of stuff, crazy stuff going on there for sure. But yeah, I remember what I reached into the beer mug and I pulled out a dollar bill and I was like, all right, that's the first dollar I ever made in comedy. I still got it framed on the wall here at my house. My first dollar I ever made in comedy. I pulled out of the beer pitcher. So
I think I spent my first 20 on the Chinese food at the restaurant.
Yeah. If you will work for food, right? That's pretty much what it comes down to in comedy. But the Improv, I mean, that's a legendary comedy club, right? I mean, you get your first paid gig there. That's not bad. Let's see. After that, he started performing regular in Greenwich Village, which is a bunch of comedy clubs down there. If you can hit that circuit, that's down in New York City. That's a pretty good scene to be on to make your bones. We all make our bones in comedy. Well, when I sent you over the list of, I said, is there a comedian on this list that, you'd like to pick? And you picked David Brenner. The list I sent over was actually Comedy Central's greatest comedians of all time, where he ranked number 53 of all time. Do you think that's an accurate ranking for him? Or
it's tough because, I mean, I don't know who's making these judges, but it's just tough because, as I said, like, David Letterman, Jerry Seinfeld, all these people, I don't know if we have these guys without him. I would probably try to rank him a little higher, but again, as you said, I don't know what kind of staying power he has. I don't know if people remember him as well as they
we'll get into that later, but what was I going to say now? That list is really dated because I think that was like maybe 20, 25 years ago they made that list. And it was a very distinguished panel of comedians that made it. But there's been so many, like Dave Chappelle, he wasn't even a thing in comedy when they made this list. So it's like a lot of the big stars of today, the Bill Burrs, they weren't even around when this list was made. So, but for the veteran comics, I thought they did a fairly accurate job. I mean, you could dispute it could be a little higher, a little lower, but I mean, 53. And like you said, he was like Rodney Dangerfield. As good as he was, he brought us the next generation of comics. And like you said, David Brenner did the same. A lot of comics we wouldn't know if he didn't do it first. So I guess you got to give him credit for that.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. At one point, he appeared on more talk shows than any other entertainer in history.
Just and even recently, I mean, shows that are around now, like Bill Maher's show, he was on. Because he was a lot of, once observational comedy started to take off and he realized that everyone was doing that, he said, you know what, I'm going to start talking about headlines in the news. That way my act will always be fresh. And that's something else we take for granted. Everybody does that now, and very few people were doing it back then. He kind of made that mainstream.
I've had that happen. It's like, when you get your own room, you do your jokes. And I mean, I got over an hour of material, but after a while, it's like, this joke again, this or that. The crowds have heard it. That's why you got to bring in new acts because they've heard it so many times. So if you can take a newspaper and keep it fresh, that'll keep you relevant,
Well, that's what he joked in one of his promos. I think he took the newspaper and shoved it in his pants, and people, where are your jokes? He's like, I got my jokes right here, baby.
There you go. But I mean, back then, today it's, you got the Netflix special. Before that, I think it was the Comedy Central special, But I mean, back then, late night television or any talk show, that was where your comedians made their bones. I mean, that was the only place you could really be heard as a comedian. They didn't have the internet or any access like that. It was too much, daytime, you had to be crystal clean. So late night television, you'd be a little bit edgy, but.
Well, we're similar in age too, where the fact that, anytime as a kid, you got to stay up and see Johnny Carson.
That was a treat.
That was a treat because you weren't even supposed to be up at that time. And whether it's a babysitter or your grandmother fell asleep in the chair and you're still awake and you're watching it. And you knew you were watching something special.
And we could say we were around for the birth of cable television. I mean, we had 4, 5, 7 on the staticky UHF channels. I mean, when pay TV came around, this was, oh my God, a big thing. And all of a sudden there's HBO, these comics can use whatever language they want. It was a whole new birth for comedy.
I was in the 5th grade and I came home and I'm flipping channels. I'm like, there's something on every channel. And by the time I got to channel 11, I found Tom and Jerry. like 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and I'm like in 5th grade. I'm like, Tom and Jerry's on in the middle of the afternoon. This is great.
My dad was too cheap to get it. My best friend had it, so I was want to hang out at his house because he had cable pay TV. Whoa, all these channels. This is cool. But let's see. He wrote 5 books. Let's see if I get these right. Soft Pretzels with Mustard in 1983. Revenge is the Best Excuse in 1984. Nobody Ever Sees You Eat Tuna Fish in 1986. If God Wanted You to Travel in 1990. And I think there is a terrorist in my soup. How to Survive Personal and World Problems with Laughter Seriously in 2003. Have you read any of his books or no?
Yeah, I saw Pretzels with Mustard, definitely. And the funny thing about these things was he was so good at writing these things, but he didn't like doing it. Like he had these ideas for books, and he would always say, "Oh my gosh, I got this great idea," and he talked to a publisher, and he was kind of hoping the publisher would say no, because then the publisher would say, "Oh my gosh, that's great, do it," and then he'd walk out and like, damn it, now I got to write this book that I said I could. And you know what? I mean, he must have liked it somewhat because he did 5 of them.
Well, if you're on the bestseller list, that's when the money starts rolling in. So that's a good incentive to keep doing them, I guess, if you're getting paid, right?
Yep.
Huh. So what was the book about? Was it just his jokes written out, or was it?
Yeah. It was like observational jokes and stuff like that. Yeah.
Okay, that's what it was. All right. Okay. Now I'll give you a trivia right now. The best-selling comedy album of all time actually belongs to Jeff Foxworthy with his Might Be a Redneck, okay, which is surprising but once you think about it, I don't think it's because he's the best comedian. It's because they stopped making comedy albums. You can't make any money off them anymore because all of the internet downloading. I mean, a comedy album's a thing of the past. They don't make them. Now it's comedy specials where, back then you'd sell a comedy album for $10, then charge $10 to come see you live. Nowadays, you got to do a Netflix special for free, and then you charge $20 to come see you live. That's where you make up your money. So I don't think it's that Jeff Foxworthy had the biggest. It was just they stopped making them because they couldn't make any money. But he was around. He actually put out an album. Excuse Me, Are You Reaching for That Paper? On MTV.
Are you reading that paper?
Yeah, 1983. What do you remember about that?
Well, what's great about it is where you get the title from, because it's a true story. He was sitting on the subway, and he was actually sitting on a newspaper, and somebody goes, "Excuse me, are you reading that paper?" And he thought it'd be funny to stand up, turn the page, and sit back down on it, and goes, "Yeah, yes, I am."
You're not stealing my paper. That was a true story on the subway. But do you remember? I mean, listening to the album as a kid, or?
Yeah, that's what I said. Like one of the things that when I decided to do comedy, I had some of his albums, and that routine about the difference between mothers and fathers, and I recommend anyone looking up. It's just absolutely hilarious.
It's just relatable material. We all got a mother.
Oh yeah, it was relatable. He talked about his family and stuff like that, and it's a comedy album that's absolutely funny.
Comedy album, a long forgotten art. Boy, I wish they still had some around. The old Bill Cosby albums. You judge man every which way but sideways, but his albums were freaking legendary, and kids are robbed of that today. I mean, they're not going to be driving around popping the comedy album in their car and listening to it. It's a thing of the past. But I guess you lose one thing and another door opens, because internet's the thing, which we didn't have that back then, so it's a trade-off.
Yeah, I always say I would like to go back and live in the 70s or whatever, but I would miss the internet. I do like
I mean, you go to YouTube and watch a comedian anytime you want, where, as we mentioned, we had to stay up, and we were lucky to see late night or HBO when it first came out. But all right, so the Tonight Show with Carson, he did 158 appearances. As we mentioned, he guest hosted 75 times from 1975 to 84. 5th all time on that list. I mean, just one appearance on Carson would be something, but 158?
Yep.
That's just.
And that's what he said too. He goes, there's so many, every time you come on, you had to come up with like a new 4-minute bit, because you couldn't, once you're on the Tonight Show, you really can't repeat your jokes. You can do a whole tour.
It's a lot of material, you're right, yeah.
But that's what he jokingly claimed to Carson. He's like, I can't keep coming up with this. And Johnny Carson's like, why do you think I keep inviting you back? He's like, I like to just sit back and watch somebody else tell jokes for, for 5 minutes or so.
Yeah, I didn't think of that. That is a lot of material, because I've done local TV a few times, and I was on in Milford a bunch of times. They get any new material? I'm like, you've had me on so many times, I'm kind of running out here, to be honest with you. I mean, at least what I can put on TV,
Right,
so.
right.
All right, let's see. 1976, he had a TV series called Snip, which was set in a hairdressing salon.
Yep,
But
it was
before it ever
inspired by
aired,
the movie Shampoo, and
that gave him the idea for it, the movie Shampoo, the idea for the TV show, but it was canceled by NBC before it ever aired because in it, it had the first gay person in a situational comedy, which shows you how much the times have changed. That NBC's
now you,
canceling the show because they didn't want a gay person in a situational comedy.
now you almost have to have a gay
Yeah, I
person.
know. Now it's like it'd be unheard of. But I mean, can you imagine a day and age today where everybody's offended so much by everything? If that happened today, the uproar there would be. And
Yeah, it's a shame. It's too bad because I would have loved to have seen this thing. Leslie Ann Warren was in it. Of course, I liked her. She was. I don't know if you ever saw the movie Victor Victoria. She played the Ditz in that. She played his wife, and it sounded like it could have been a decent sitcom. David Brenner
good
should
idea,
have
right? We'll never
a
know. We were
sitcom.
robbed of it. Yeah, but that's the day and age it was. That's why HBO came around because you could do a lot of stuff on there that they couldn't get away with on pay TV. On regular
And
TV.
the thing, I mean, how can you have a sitcom about a hair salon and not have a gay
without having a gay
character in it?
person in, right? That wouldn't even be funny, I guess. But it was breakthrough when they did start putting these gay characters on. I mean, they started breaking new ground, and people were tuning in. So they might have tuned in just for that case. We don't know.
Yep.
So robbed of an opportunity, but I guess that's the story in comedy. I mean, we've all been robbed of opportunities for one reason or another in comedy, right? Where
Hey, you looking at a guy who's pitched 2 sitcoms on networks, and they said no. So I'm not saying I was robbed, but I am saying that the sitcoms I pitched are better than She's the Sheriff.
there you go. Well, Simon Cowell, I guess, said it best. If you can't stand being beat down, this is the wrong business. Get out of it, man. You're in the wrong business for you. It's going to kick you down and treat you terrible, and you just got to get up and keep trying. If you ain't cut out for that, then get out of comedy.
Yep.
Oh, let's see. 1986, King's World Entertainment gave him his own 30-minute late night talk show called Nightlife. Do you remember that at all? Or?
Yeah, and it was different. There was no coming out in a suit and doing a monologue. He was like in a sweater and just behind the desk, and he gave a lot of comedians their start on that show. What was really cool was Billy Preston was his band leader, because this thing was a mix between King Media and Motown. Actually, they got together, and what ultimately doomed the show was that David Brenner said, he's like, Motown and the King Media, they hated working with each other. He's like, so I was kind of like a kid whose parents were getting divorced, and I was just sort of caught in the middle with this thing here.
Oh,
And,
gee,
yep, it didn't work.
Well, I mean, he was put on in the same time slot to compete with Carson, which, as we mentioned, that didn't work out good for Joan Rivers.
Right. Well, it's funny because he went to Johnny and said, "Listen, I've got this opportunity. I don't need your permission, but I would like your blessing."
Blessing, right? Where Joan Rivers never did that, right? She didn't check in with the Godfather if it was okay, right? Let's see. It was canceled after one season, and as you said, there were alternative variants of that. But when they first started out, it was dubbed because you couldn't compete with the Tonight Show; nobody could. So they had to dub it as an alternative to Johnny Carson. And as you mentioned, he didn't wear a necktie; he came out casual. And years later, I remember Jimmy Kimmel. He tried to do the same thing, where he came out, he didn't wear a necktie, and he tried to get it past the network where he could drink beer during his show, where they didn't let him do that, but he wanted to, which was a spinoff of the Man Show.
He wanted to give everyone in the audience like a shot or something.
He wanted to drink beer while he was doing his interview. He wanted to be different than any other, show. But now it's later on. Now Jimmy Kimmel wears a necktie, and he kind of bought into what you had to do, where he's not the alternative anymore. But that was why he was first brought in. But who knew he'd be the first to be brought in to David Brenner be the first guy to be like the alternative to the mainstream, late night talk show.
I heard it didn't have a full network. It was more of a syndicated thing. Like a lot of the ABC stations took it, but then it wasn't in every single market, and that's something else that hurt it too.
All right. So just to show you how big this guy was in comedy at the time, where I can name off the shows, but I'll name off some shows here. And you just tell me real quick if you remember him on them or what you think about him being on them. The Ed Sullivan Show he was on.
Oh, geez, yeah. I mean, it's funny. You look back at Ed Sullivan, and of course, Ed Sullivan was more of a, like an entertainment personality. I mean, the fact he was just hosting the show, not because he was good at it, but just because he knew all these people. And that's another one. I mean, where you just, you had to get on that show if you wanted to get somewhere.
He was kind of the guy before Carson. Yeah, if you wanted to make it in the business, that was the show
Yep.
to be on. Then after him, it was Carson, and he passed the torch to Carson. But back in the day, yeah, it was the Ed Sullivan Show. The David Frost Show.
Yeah, I did not see anything on that one.
All right, the Mike Douglas Show.
Oh God, yeah, oh yeah. I mean, that was your afternoon show. That was where you got your entertainment. People would come out, they would sing, and yeah, there was a lot of good guests on that. Yep, I remember that one.
Remember
Absolutely.
David Brenner's appearance on there, or that's not one that you remember? No, you just remember.
I don't remember. Not live. I have seen it.
Right.
I have seen that one. Yes.
All right, obviously seen these two. Do you remember his appearances? Late Night and The Late Show, both with David Letterman. Do you remember?
Oh yes, yeah, absolutely.
That's getting more into our generation, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And as I said, David Letterman David Brenner was one of his inspirations too. So he was only too thrilled to get him on the show as often as he could.
Oh, sure. When you have one of your heroes on, that's always I mean, Sam Kinnison's the reason I got into comedy, and I got to go meet his brother. I got to stay overnight at his house. He pulled out Sam Kinnison's trench coats and guitars, and we got to touch him. And it was like, I'm a kid in a candy store, man. Wow. But,
wow. What
touch a hero's life like that. Yeah.
That's a great story.
All right. Well, you mentioned this one earlier, Real Time with Bill Maher. Do you remember his appearance on there?
Yep.
What was that? What do you remember from that one?
I don't remember exactly but what I like about him politically is that, the problem is so many of the comedians now, they're like one-sided politically. And if you're not taking shots at both sides, to me, you come off as a sort of
you'll alienate half your audience. Yeah,
and you come off as a show for somebody where he obviously, most entertainers, they lean left, but he had no problem criticizing like Hillary Clinton or things like that. And there's enough crap on both sides that you can make fun of.
But I made that mistake. Political humor is such a big thing. When I first started out, I was a little small part of my act, but it was the most controversial. I was starting to walk the room, and I stopped doing the political jokes. I said, where
it's tough. I don't like to do it too because, as you said, you can alienate half the audience. One time I did
easy. Yeah.
It was it was the election when Trump and Hillary were going, and I just did a quick thing. Raise your hand if you're voting for Trump. I made a Trump joke. Raise your hand if you're voting for Hillary. I made a Hillary joke, and I said, raise your hand if you think we're screwed no matter what. So basically, I kind of just made it like a neutral thing.
You hit both sides, right? So you wouldn't offend anybody.
I did that, and I'm like, all right, now on to my regular material. I got that out of the way. Boom, it's done.
Well, I've talked to veteran comics. They say the way to do it is pick a subject, but don't use names. If you use a name, you're going to alienate half your audience. Like if you say, Trump care or Obamacare or something, now you're going to alienate somebody. If you just say health care, now you're not alienating anybody because you're not attaching a name to it. So that's the trick there. But political humor, it's tricky. Let's see. David Brenner on The Daily Show. Do you remember on The Daily Show?
Oh, yeah. And in fact, he liked The Daily Show because he's like, when he started doing the news headlines, he's like, there wasn't anything like that now. And then when he saw The Daily Show, he was like,
perfect platform.
Yeah, I don't know if he's necessarily proud, like, oh my God, look what I've become, but wow, this is something that, I was one of the early founders of, and look at this level that it's been taken to, and so he was a big fan.
Taking my idea to the next level, right? I see what you're saying. Here's one I would have always loved to do. He was on the Howard Stern Show. Have you ever remember?
Oh yes. It was kind of later on. He was doing a lot of appearances there, and just talking about his life. And it's just telling some stories of the old days.
Yeah, I know Howard. He has a knack of getting things out of you that nobody else could get out of you because he loosens you up, and then he gets to telling stories that you really don't want to tell, but he's got you so loose and joking around that you actually do it. But all right. In his later years, I guess going back to the book, I think he was on MSNBC.
Yeah, I heard that he had appeared on MSNBC and on Fox. So again, equal time.
That was the next one, Fox News Channel he was on. What do you remember of those?
Yeah, I did not see either of those. I kind of don't watch a lot of those political networks, so
yeah, they're fun for a little while, then they just drive you nuts after a while. You better get in your head.
Well, that's what I said. Like I've hosted. I did a sports talk show in Springfield for 7 years. I do a music show now, And I said, if I ever did a political show, my mind would blow up. I don't think I could do it for more than 6 months. I think I would
Yeah,
lose
you
my
gotta have a
mind.
stomach for it, that's for sure. Yeah, but we'll give you radio credits now. What have you done in radio, just so the listeners know why we got you on here? What
Oh yeah, well, I had a sports talk show in Springfield, Massachusetts for 7 years, the Average Joe Show, um, and that was a daily show, drive time
that
show. Now I
started
do a
on what,
show.
ESPN, right?
Yep, yep, ESPN 1450. They are now I believe, a classic country station now.
Where
But
can they tune
7
that
years is
in
a
if
good
they want
run.
to tune you in?
Yeah. Now I'm on. You can watch it westfieldtv.org or Agawam Public TV or Southwick Public TV. Every Monday morning, 8 to 10 a.m., I do a show. I play music from the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and sometimes newer. And I tell you the stories behind them, like what does the song mean, why it was written, or any kind of interesting fact about the song.
I remember you had me on for a couple minutes. I called in. I chose "Pretty Woman" by Roy Orbison, and you talked
Yep.
a little bit about the history.
Yep.
So I'm doing the history of comedy. You're doing the history of music. We're history buffs. Okay.
That's what we are.
All right. I guess the one big film that you could put to David Brenner's name was he played a charity ball auctioneer in 1989's Worth Winning. Do you remember that movie?
Yes, and I do. I am begging you in the audience, do not watch this film.
That bad?
It's a bad film. Mark Harmon. David Brenner has a small part in the movie, but yeah, Mark Harmon. He tries to win a bet that he can get like 3 women to accept his proposal.
Oh, okay.
Look, all right. I know you're Mark Harmon and everything, and I know you're good looking and everything, but what kind of stupid plot is this for a movie?
That's the womanizing thing. All right. Well,
And of course,
I recently had you in my first movie I'm
he
making.
gets the 3 women, and then he accidentally falls in love with one of them, and it's embarrassing. It's
too cliche, right?
Yeah.
All right. Well, we got a movie coming out. The World Needs a New Superhero, which you played my lawyer in, and
yes.
So I mean, this guy, right now, one of the actors got in a car accident, so the movie's on hold for the time being till he heals up and we can finish it out. But it's coming.
But I mean, David Brenner would have been a big fan of this movie, because I'm sure you are well aware of his custody battles.
I was gonna get into that. This guy's up my alley with that. Let's talk about it now. We can go back. He had a bitter custody battle over one of his children with his ex. And because he did comedy, he would have been seen by the courts as an absent father because you're on the road constantly. Yep. Hats off to this guy. He gave up more than 50 nights a year if you're gone. He gave up spots on the Tonight Show, which, you die any comedy, gave him up. I ain't going on Tonight Show anymore. I'm not touring anymore. I'm going to be a father. He actually did win custody of his children for that. Man, can you imagine being a comedian and just giving up that much, all you've worked for your children? I mean,
I know. Well, I mean, I guess that's what being the parents.
I mean, I do it too. You do it too. We're parents. Yeah, I mean, you do it.
It's funny because you get married, and that old thing, like, would I give my life for my wife? And you like to say you would, but deep down you're like, I don't know if I would. But then you get
your kids, right?
Yeah, but then the kid comes in, and then you're like, oh yeah,
I'll do it. Yeah. Yeah, but I mean, just being at the top of your game like that, and just taking a step back, and nobody stays at the top of comedy forever. You have your run, and then that's it. And I mean, to be at the top and just give it up like that, but there's no better reason to do it than for your kids. And I'm surprised he won custody, even though he did give up those dates. I mean, I don't know what the deal was, but for a man back then, for a guy to win custody, it had to be something else.
And the mother, of course, like stole the kids. She was on the lam for a while, and
okay.
And they found her and everything. That doesn't help your cause.
Yeah, well, Rodney did that too. I know that's why he opened up Dangerfield's Comedy Club, because he wanted to stay in one spot and raise his kids, and that's why he stopped touring. So it's not unheard of. But I guess Rodney's mother was a real bad mother, and he never wanted to be a bad parent. That's why he did it. He was never going to be the bad parent his mother was. He wanted to be a good parent. So, all right, let's get back to his comedy history here. 1994 to 1996. 1996, he hosted a talk radio program, actually taking over for Larry King's time slot.
Yeah.
So
that's not. Boy, no pressure there, huh?
Yeah, no shoes to fill there, right, Larry King? Right, yeah, but well, earlier he had a syndicated radio show called the David Brenner Live from 1985, which ran for 3 months before he took over that time slot. But Do you remember any of his radio gig or?
No, I never heard. I was aware that they existed. I kind of like 85 and stuff. Like Brenner really became a bigger hero for me. I would say like right around 89. That's when I started to get
The talk
into
show stuff
comedy.
got you interested in him, basically, yeah.
Yeah, and then I said, yeah, this is something. This is some. I'm a big fan of this guy, and so I kind of missed out on that radio show.
But I mean, you're a radio guy yourself, so I mean, let's take it to today's day and age. Like somebody called you up and said, "Hey, Mike, we got a gig for you. Won't you take over the time slot for Howard Stern because he's going to pay radio?" I mean, what would be your first thought when they like?
I would say, you know what? I bet you I could get a 3 months pay before.
Well, they fired you.
Well, because you know what? You never want to be. I compare it to. You remember the sitcom Alice?
Yeah, the waitress
Okay,
diner.
you don't want to replace Flo. So what you do is you
Yes,
get somebody.
grits.
Yeah, you get like Belle. Okay, so everyone hated Belle because she replaced Flo, but then Jolene came in. Everyone liked Jolene because she replaced Belle. You don't want to be Belle. That's why with
You don't want to be the second somebody. You want to be
Right.
the first somebody,
Jeopardy
right?
needs to hire themselves a Belle, and that way they can fire Belle after 3 months, and then they bring in Jolene, and everyone's going to love Jolene.
That's like the Dukes of Hazzard when they brought in Coy and Vance. They just couldn't cut it, man. Nobody was buying that trick. Okay.
Nope, everyone's a cousin. Nobody's a brother or sister.
All right. Let's see. He was originally from Philadelphia. The broadcast pioneer of Philadelphia named the Funny Man of the Year in 1984 and inducted him into the Hall of Fame in 2003. So I guess, we're from Massachusetts. Can you imagine if Boston did that? I mean, that's some pretty big respect right there. It's kind of.
It sure would be. Now, Philadelphia, of course, when he was a kid, he was a little bit of a troublemaker. But he's basically you had to like join a gang, and he said he was the gang's negotiator. Like he wasn't like basically he would talk to the other gangs like, all right, listen, can we work this thing out here and everything?
Right.
Like, look, is there anything I can say that can fix the situation? And he goes, if they said no, then you ran.
That's it. I guess he's the guy in Philadelphia where we're Boston guys. I guess he's kind of like the Lenny Clark of Philadelphia, where Lenny's kind of Boston's representative of comedy, and he gets to do all the cool stuff. He was on Tonight Show with Jimmy Fallon had him on, which I mean, how big is that? He was on the Joe Rogan podcast, which that was a big debate we had. Okay, now. Back in the day, you'd want to be on the Tonight Show, but nowadays, if you had the choice of the Tonight Show or the Joe Rogan podcast, which one would you choose?
The brain in me would say the podcast, the Rogan podcast, but the heart.
The heart, because you grew up with the Tonight Show, right?
Just say you're on the Tonight Show. I'm like,
well, I didn't know Joe Rogan. Okay, if now the Tonight Show has so many TVs that it hits, okay. Now obviously every TV you hit, not everybody's watching it, okay. But the audience, if you're hitting 50% of the people who have TVs, you're doing good. Joe Rogan has more people tuning him in than the Tonight Show has television sets that they can possibly hit. So I mean,
that's unbelievable. And
that's an audience right there.
Yeah, I was skeptical because I wasn't overly familiar with Rogan. I just knew like he was like a host on some reality show or something. But listening to some of those podcasts, that's some good stuff.
It's pretty deep stuff. Well, Mark Maron, he was the original guy that did the comedy podcast, and Joe Rogan took his idea and took it to the next level. He got $100 million to tune in and go bring it over to Spotify and solely listen to it on Spotify now. But Joe's got a way. He can relate to the younger generation and the older generation. When you can hit both sides, and when you're doing a podcast, I know you're hitting a worldwide audience. I'll tell you this much, Mike, 5% of my listening audience is in Israel. So shout out to my Israel listeners. Thanks for tuning in.
Hey, that's awesome.
Well, I heard they're actually using comedy. I heard this from Gabriel Iglesias. They're using comedy to bring peace to the Middle East. I didn't know that. Comedy's actually turned into a big thing out there. That's how they're bringing peace to the areas through stand-up comedy.
Just as I said, that David Brenner was trying to make peace with trying to be the funny guy.
And they're doing it over there, yeah. But now Rick Jenkins, who owns the comedy studio up in Boston, he actually tells me a comic he knows actually opened a comedy club over in Israel. I'm like, comedy's a thing, and I had no idea. And but I guess they know English better than we know them. So it's
I got a friend. I got a friend who moved over there, and I'm like, wow. And she's like, yeah, everything's fine. It's not the. It's not the hot spot that everyone thinks it is, terror-wise, but she loves it there.
Well,
Not for
yeah,
me, but
one of Gabriel Iglesias specials, he has a whole comedy routine about how somebody wanted to hire him to go do comedy in the Middle East. And he's like, I don't want to go because, like you, he heard the terrorist stuff. He's like, you just hit him with a ridiculous number and tell him we need the money today or we can't do it. And his agent called, hey, Gabe, yeah, ridiculous, just called. They sent every penny they demanded for over, man. It was like some ridiculous figure. But he flew over and he said they treated him like a king. And he said, they explained to him, we're bringing peace to this area. But, well, here's one story I wanted to tell you, which I heard this about. I guess this is my favorite David Brenner story, and I'll get your opinion on it. I was watching an interview with Joan Rivers. She was on the Howard Stern show. Now, back in the day, okay, now Joan Rivers, she's the godfather of, female comedy, godmother, I guess you call her, right?
Yeah.
But back in the day, David Brenner, she was an opening act for David because David was the hot comic back then. She was the opening act, and David Brenner really helped out Joan Rivers quite a bit on her comedy career as Johnny Carson did, okay? Now, in the later years, as we said, the kids of today probably don't even know who David Brenner is. Well, he actually, he fell off. Not as many people were coming to his shows. And I guess he called up Joan and they were talking. And he's like, I've really hit tough times. I got bills to pay and I'm not making much money at my comedy shows anymore. You think you could help me out? I mean, we can do some shows together. And she's like, well, what do you want to do? He's like, well, let's do a couple shows together and we'll split the door. She's like, well, I'm making more than that myself. Why would I split the door? She's like, I'll give you a third. And when he heard a third, boom, he hung up on her, never talked to Joan Rivers again.
Wow.
Yeah, what do you think of that story?
Yeah, I don't like that story.
I know. Well, that's kind of like I said earlier, the student surpassing the teacher. But I mean, Joan had surpassed him, but she wouldn't have been in that position to surpass him if he didn't give her a break. So it's kind of which side would you take in that argument? I don't even know. I mean.
Yeah, I know. I mean, they both have a good argument.
Yeah. I mean, she can make that much money herself. Why give him half? But he's saying, hey, you wouldn't be making that money if it wasn't for me giving you a break. So cut me a break now. And
I would say, hey, how about we just do like a week together in Vegas? And I'm like, is that going to hurt you? Losing some of your book for 1 week in Vegas or something.
He's like, I'll give you a third, and that's more than fair. But I guess you're talking down to the guy at that point when you say, I'll give you a third. I mean.
I love his story. Like
I did a couple of shows, and the guy who taught me comedy, I heard, got upset that I didn't put him on the show, but they hired me to headline, and I'm like, well, what am I going to ask you to come open for me? And you taught me comedy? Like, I don't want to insult you. Then he kind of calmed down when I told him that. I'm like, not that I don't want you on the show. I don't want to insult you,
There was a comedian who he had me open up for him a lot, and I was offered a gig. It was like a bachelor party. And this was a horrible thing because it was on a shore of a lake and it was freezing. The food was inside. The beer was inside. We were outside on the frozen, windy lake trying to entertain people. It was like a bus station, people going in and out. But I was offered an obscene amount of money. And I said, I'm going to hire the guy who always hired me to cut up some of this time. Right. And when we got there, I said, you know what? I'm just so used to being in front of you. And even though, I had hired him, I said, why don't we just do this like we normally do? Like, I'm going to go first.
Pay respect to him. You don't want to insult the guy. I understand what you're saying. I do that. I mean, the guy who taught me comedy, even if it's my show, I'll put him on the headline and I'll feature. We're probably doing the same time, but I'm giving him respect. You've been doing it longer than me, but we were brought up that way. I was brought up, you watch my back, I watch yours. You scratch my back, I scratch yours. You take care of me, I take care of you. We go to war, we both come out alive, we both come out dead. But nowadays, it's not like that. I give so many people breaks that I see they put on shows and don't invite me. And it's like, really? Really? All I did for you? No, you're not going to. But I mean, they're trying to make other connections too, other than me. I understand that. So it's a slippery slope. Welcome to comedy, right?
Yeah, it's you like to think there's some kind of brotherhood, but it basically is, the sad truth is everyone's out there for themselves.
It's a dog eat dog world. That's the truth. And no matter how close you are, like you said, everybody's in it for themselves. All right, getting toward the end of the podcast, I guess last thing we'll say about David Brenner, 2014. Well, in 2000, he lived in Vegas for a while. 2014, he passed away of pancreatic cancer in his Manhattan home, which is in New York. World lost a great comedian, but what are your final thoughts? What did the world lose when they lost David Brenner?
Yeah, I mean, just like I said, one of the true pioneers of observational comedy. When he passed, he just in case he stuffed when he realized he was dying, he stuffed a couple $100 bills in his socks just in case tipping in the next life got you a better table.
All right. So I guess when the mortuary was peeling off his socks, they found a few hundred.
Yeah.
Now, do they give it to the family or do they keep it? I guess that'd be the question. Hey, we found 200 in his socks. Do you want it? What do you say, right?
Yep.
That's a joke in itself right there. What's the funeral home think when they see that? I don't know. All right.
On his tombstone, he had, if this is a joke, I don't get it.
There you go. That's the perfect ending to a perfect career, I guess. We all got to
Yep.
go sometime, I guess.
And that's what he said. He learned from his fathers. Always leave them laughing. And
He left them laughing on his tombstone right there. Yep. Okay. Well, thanks again for being on, Mike. Michael Buster McMahon, radio personality. One more time, what's the website if they want to tune in your radio show?
Yeah, westfieldtv.org. Every Monday, 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. You can learn the stories behind some of your favorite songs.
All right, so I'd suggest you tune in Funny.com podcast, tune in Mike, and we are together, Mike and Dennis. We're going to be in my movie, The World Needs a New Superhero, and I look forward to seeing it at the premiere whenever that is.
And I'm not ready to say that, of course, COVID delayed stand-up comedy. I'll get out there again, stand-up comedy.
We'll be back.
Yep.
I had one guest on, and he said it perfect. Comedy always survives. Comedy has survived the pandemic.
Amen, buddy.
We'll see
Thank you very much.
Take care. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.